Chapter 22 Through the Looking Glass. No one was really excited for school to start. All through New Horizons, groans could be heard as kids were roused from sleep. It was the last week of regular classes before finals, and that meant one thing: studying. All of the students were dreading the coming day, except for one. There was a knock on the door, although it was unnecessary. "Sunset, it's time." "I'm up," Sunset said before answering the door. A very pleased Rose Petal was on the other side. "Good morning, Miss Rose." "Good morning, Sunset. Glad to see there's at least one person we won't need to convince to get up today." Sunset laughed. "Yeah, well, it's not like I have any reason to worry about finals." Of course, that was because Sunset had no plans on taking them. "I'm sure, but you can never be too prepared." "I know." Sunset was already dressed and had chosen a loose-fitting sundress. It was exactly the type of thing that maternal figures like Rose thought she should wear, which would hopefully mean it was perfect for Sunset's purposes. She gestured to her backpack, which was sitting by her bed, ready to go. "Trust me, there's nothing to worry about with me. I'm ready to take on the day." "That's what I like to hear." Rose was beaming, but she took a step away from the door. "But I best get to waking up the others, and you ought to get some food in you. You're not really prepared for school unless you've had a good breakfast." Sunset just smiled and followed Rose Petal out of the room. "Of course, Miss Rose." While everyone else was insistent on looking as miserable as possible, Sunset couldn't help but keep smiling. It was going to be one hell of a day. She was far too excited to be hungry, but she still got a bowl of cereal. If she didn't eat something, Rose would be on her case about it. On most days, that wouldn't really bother her, but Sunset was far too happy to spoil it by bickering over breakfast. Although Rose being up was also strange. When she finished waking teenagers and entered the dining room, Sunset decided to ask her about it. "You're up early today, Miss Rose." "At my age, sleeping through the night can be a challenge." Rose looked over to Sunset's breakfast choice. "Just a bowl of cereal?" Sunset shrugged. "Who wants to eat this early? I'll eat a granola bar on the bus or something." Rose shook her head, but she was smiling as well. "I suppose it'll have to do." As Rose turned her attention to the other kids and was getting them to eat, Sunset realized she was actually happy by the turn of events. Rose Petal had been the first person to welcome her to New Horizons, and while it would be overly gracious to say that Sunset's feelings towards the orphanage itself were mixed, Rose had always tried her best to make Sunset feel at home. Once or twice, she almost even succeeded. And this would be the last time Sunset ever saw her. It's not like that hadn't occurred to Sunset before, but she had been too preoccupied to give it any real thought. It was an odd sensation, and it left her wondering at all the other last times she was about to experience, and how many had passed her by without her so much as noticing them. Sunset didn't say anything to Rose. She thought about saying something meaningful about the time they spent together. No words came to mind, however, so she just watched. Rose doted on every child at the table, offering encouragement about their classes, trying to get them to be a little more active and alert. She asked them about the day-to-day events of their lives, and referenced things about their individual interests. Sunset had never thought much of that before, but Rose knew every single child that came through New Horizons, while Sunset couldn't even remember all of their names. It had to be a challenge, keeping up with everyone, but by the end of the day, there would be one less person for her to keep up with. "I think it's time for one young lady to get going to her bus stop," Rose said after a while. "Have a good day, dearie." Sunset nodded and stood up. "Thank you, Miss Rose." In the end, that was really all there was to say. After a quick trip back to her room to grab her backpack, Sunset left New Horizons. She didn't say goodbye to anyone on the way out. Even Sunset's bus stop was a bit of a walk. There were only a few CHS students who lived as far away from the school as Sunset did, after all, so the stop had to service a fairly wide area. She didn't mind, though. It would also be the last time she walked to it, and the last time she'd be in complete solitude before her life changed forever. Or rather, before she got her life back. That was a better way of looking at things, she decided. And it was a glorious thing to think about. It was with great restraint that she managed to calmly walk to her bus stop, but running wouldn't make her bus arrive any sooner, so she kept her pace at a brisk walk. Technically speaking, Sunset had no idea if the portal would actually be open. Both Equestria and Earth used a 24-hour cycle for the length of their days, so figuring out when the portal would be open was theoretically just a matter of counting from the date of her arrival, but it was impossible to know if time really synced up. The flow of time could easily be different between the worlds. 1 second in Equestria was not necessarily 1 second on Earth. Sunset reminded herself of this, if only to fight off the crushing disappointment if it wasn't the right day. But her working theory was that time did sync up between the worlds. If they were completely separate worlds, then that would be exceedingly unlikely. But while these worlds were clearly separated and held many distinctions, they were also connected. The most obvious being doubles of various ponies and humans, but there were other significant similarities. Scientifically speaking, the two worlds were alike in far more ways than they were different. And assuming her theory of a perfect time sync was correct, the portal would already be open. It would have been open for several hours, long enough that Sunset had been tempted to just walk to school in the night. But she had waited far too long to suffer some nefarious fate on the eve of her return, so she played it safe, waiting until the morning to do things properly. That wait was excruciating. She had been up all night long, having given up on sleep after rolling around her bed for a few hours. And the closer she came to the wondrous moment that she could finally leave this world behind, the harder the wait became. Her pace was quick enough that she found the walk to be much shorter than usual, but that just meant the wait for the bus was much longer than usual. While she was waiting, she wondered for the first time what would happen without her. It had almost certainly been seeing Rose interact with the others that put the idea in her mind, as that was the first place her mind went to. Rose would be distraught to have lost one of her charges. She was used to saying goodbye to the children she cared for, but not so suddenly. Violet would probably lead the charge to find her. There would be an obvious trail. Sunset had left for the bus stop, and someone on the bus would remember seeing her on it. The driver would verify that every student arrived at school safely, but her first period teacher would inform them that she never made it to class. They'd search and search, but they'd never find her. Perhaps Sunset should have left a note. Not saying that she was leaving for another dimension, of course, but something to give an actual explanation. Say that she was running away or something along those lines. But it was too late. She had passed the chance to do anything like that, so there was no point in dwelling on it. Still, she couldn't help but wonder what everyone would assume. Flash would be the first to notice, of course. The poor sap was probably going to be looking for her all summer long, and still be hopeful that she'd just show up on the first day of school after summer break. And there was Applejack. Would she even notice Sunset was missing? Of course she would. The school would make an announcement in case any students knew where she was. Applejack would be there, right alongside Flash and Violet while they looked for her. Not because they had history together or anything like that. No, Applejack would be out there looking for her because that was just who Applejack was. Sunset wondered if she should try and find Applejack before going through the portal. But what would she say? Hey, AJ, just so you know, I'm a fucking magical horse and I'm going back to my horse land. That'd go over real well. She couldn't even make up a believable alibi, since that would just lead to Applejack trying to stop her. Even still, a large part of Sunset wanted to find her before she left, to at least see her one last time before leaving forever. Even if they didn't speak, Sunset could still say her own personal goodbyes to the only person she'd ever wanted to be close to. But now, even disregarding the fact that Sunset had no idea where Applejack would be, it wouldn't do her any good. She needed to move on from this world, and that included Applejack. By the end of the day, she would only be a memory. The time Sunset spent in the human world was filled with regrets more than anything else, or was one more added to the pile. Although the wait was torturous, the bus arrived all the same. Sunset hardly paid attention to the kids around her as she found her seat, letting their talk of finals and summer plans pass over her. She chose an empty seat at random and stared out the window. The bus went on its way while the world outside rolled past, but Sunset wasn't paying it any attention. She was watching her transparent reflection as it watched her. Sunset had spent a lot of time in that body, but in the end, That was just another thing to put behind her. What would happen on the other side of the mirror? What would Celestia say when she saw Sunset again? What would Sunset say? These were the thoughts that passed through her head, just as they had passed through it for months. She had no answers, but she had faith. Faith in Celestia. Sunset would apologize. That much was certain. She would admit her mistakes, that she hadn't really understood anything about the mirror when Celestia had warned her away from it. She knew better now. Now she would listen to every word Celestia said, obey every order, all if there was even so much as a chance that she might be her gifted student again. And she would be. Sunset knew it would be heard. She knew that Celestia had every reason to turn her away, but she would prove herself again. Whatever it took, anything at all, Sunset would do it. They would pick up where they left off, and Sunset would be a better student this time, and Celestia would understand, and they would both finally be happy. And so her thoughts continued throughout the bus ride. 100 scenarios played through her mind, of all the different ways the meeting could go. Sometimes Celestia was relieved to see her, sometimes she was angry. In all of them, the ending was the same. They would reconcile their differences, and Sunset would be her student, and Celestia would understand, and they would both be happy. When the bus reached the school, Sunset remained staring at her reflection for a moment. Other kids were up and moving to the exit, but Sunset was trying to calm her breathing. It was time. She was going home. She was the last to leave the bus, and she did so with her legs shaking. She felt like they might give out under her weight. For all the rush she had been in, she now found it difficult to move at all. But one shaky step after another, she made her way across the school. There was no more thinking about anything else. Sunset wasn't even thinking about Equestria anymore, just the portal and making her way to it. If anyone tried to gain her attention, she didn't notice. As far as Sunset was aware, there were no other people around her. There was just the portal, herself, and the distance between the two. Until there wasn't even that anymore. Sunset stood before the statue, staring at her reflection in the polished surface. It was just the same as it had been the day before, and yet it was very different. It was a feeling. Was it the magic making her lightheaded, or her inability to breathe? Sunset reached out her hand, but stopped just before touching it. It wasn't too late to turn back. She could wait, and the dream of a perfect world would remain untouched. But it was too late. Sunset could already hear it calling to her, drawing her in. She closed her eyes and let herself fall forward. It was time. Sunset was going home. The sensation was awful. It felt like being pulled in every direction with no control of what was happening. Her perception was so consumed by the feeling that it didn't even occur to her what it meant. And then it stopped, just as soon as it started. Sunset found herself lying on the ground with her eyes closed, and everything felt strange. Her body felt sore all over, and for a moment, she just lay still. She opened her eyes and blinked at her surroundings. There was no school. There weren't teenagers wandering around. Sunset was in a small room, and the only lighting was natural sunlight coming in through the windows. It worked. It had actually worked. The portal had taken her away from the hell she had gotten herself stuck in, and there was no doubt about where it had taken her. Sunset tried to move, but only fell back down to the floor. She turned to look at her body, and found all she could see was a no longer fitting dress covering it. She laughed at the unexpected obstruction, and worked on freeing herself from it. Or she tried to, anyway. When she attempted to grab the dress, she realized she was unable to. Her hooves slipped right off it. Forgetting the dress completely, Sunset held her hooves up to her face and laughed giddily. It had really worked. She was really a pony. Unable to bring herself to do anything else, Sunset just lay on her back, staring at her hooves and laughing. She pressed them against her cheek. She had forgotten they were so hard. She had forgotten everything it meant to be a pony. More so driven by the desire to see herself than anything else, Sunset eventually saw fit to do something about the dress. It wasn't easy, but at least she wasn't wearing pants. Little by little, she managed to shimmy out of the dress. It tore in several places as she did, but she certainly couldn't manage to care about that. Once she was no longer tangled up in human clothing, Sunset paused to look at herself. She was still awestruck when she noticed a mirror out of the corner of her eye and quickly turned to it. She saw a unicorn, because that was what she was. An amber-colored coat with a red and yellow mane and tail. A picture of a red and yellow sun adorned her thigh, and, despite the tears in her eyes, she was smiling. There was no telling how long she just sat and stared at her reflection, but it was the dress that got her to turn away. She surveyed the remains. Even if it had fit her, it certainly wouldn't any longer, which was kind of a shame. She wanted to wear something nice for her meeting with Celestia. Celestia! Sunset still had to see her. It was what she wanted more than anything, after all. She was going to get her old life back, and Sunset would be her student, and Celestia would understand, and they would both be happy. But first, she had to learn how to walk again. Even standing felt awkward, but distributing her weight onto 4 hooves certainly made that easier. Walking proved a bit more tricky, but she was in no hurry. As much as she was dying to meet Celestia, the simple pleasure of being a pony again was immeasurable, and she found the clip-clop of her hooves against the stone floor was practically hypnotic. Before she dared step hoof out of the room, Sunset wanted a glimpse of Equestria. Thankfully, there were windows scattered around the room. She walked over to one and took a look outside, and the view stole her breath away. She was high up in what she knew was Celestia's castle, with the city stretched out below her. Although they were small, dozens of ponies could be seen on the ground, all going about their business. They were talking among themselves, they were walking to and fro. They were doing jobs above the castle grounds, and above all else, they simply were. An entire world of ponies, and Sunset was once again part of it. So, it was time to be part of it then. She walked to the door and was relieved to find it opened easily at her push. She found herself in a long hallway, although her memory failed to tell her which part of the castle she was actually in. Considering she had been completely familiar with it before her departure, it had to be a result of spending so much time away. Oh well, she'd have plenty of time to relearn the castle's layout once she was Celestia's student once more. In the meantime, she had absolutely no complaints about walking the castle hallways aimlessly. Sooner or later she'd either realize where she was, or she'd run into a guard that could direct her. But for now, observing and remembering was enough. She couldn't pick out specific details, but she definitely recognized the castle's signature architecture. The marble floor was a checkerboard pattern, with white pillars reaching to the vaulted ceiling that lined the walkway. There were elegant decorations all around, from the ornate carpet underhoof to the flowers that decorated the walls. But the most eye-catching thing was, of course, the stained-glass windows. Sunset took her time to admire them as she walked, for they showed a rich history that she had almost let herself forget. Each one was unique, and she was sure that she'd see one she remembered before too long, and the realization of where she was within the castle would follow. It turned out she needn't have bothered. As she walked along at her leisurely pace, a door opened in front of her. Sunset stopped in place, her heart beating fast at the realization that some pony was about to walk out of it. Steady clip-clop of hooves came into the hallway first, but that was soon followed up by the appearance of a unicorn. Although Sunset was no longer used to seeing ponies, she guessed that the mare in front of her was younger than herself. She had a light purple coat with a darker purple mane and tail, both of which had a pink stripe running through them. She held a book in front of her with a magic aura, which she seemed to be devoting all her attention to. So much so, in fact, that she walked right past Sunset with neither one saying a word. Sunset watched her as she walked along the hallway, too stunned to speak. It was only when the other mare was almost past the point of easy earshot that Sunset realized she was about to let a golden opportunity walk past her. Excuse me, Sunset said. It was the first time she had spoken since arriving in Equestria, and she noted her voice sounded a little deeper. The other mare's ears swiveled back, with her head following a moment later. Ears moving independently from the rest of the head was a natural equine movement, and something Sunset had forgotten all about. There was so much to relearn, but she was ready. "Oh, hello there," the mare said with a smile. "Can I help you with something?" Sunset opened her mouth. There was just so much. She was talking to an actual, real, live pony. Not some horse in a barn, but a genuine unicorn of Equestria. But she needed to focus. There was still something she needed to do. I'm looking for Princess Celestia. Do you know where I can find her? The mayor's smile faltered. I'm sorry, but the princess isn't taking visitors at the moment. The news only made Sunset smile more. She was talking to an actual pony about Princess Celestia. It's okay. She'll make an exception for me. Sunset desperately hoped that was true. Maybe there's some pony else who can help you? The mayor suggested. I can direct you to one of her aides or her secretary, even the captain of the guard if it's an emergency. No, Sunset said too forcefully. She tried to return to her casual tone, but she was suddenly having trouble breathing. It has to be Princess Celestia. The mayor chuckled nervously. Haha, well then, could you at least tell me what's so important? Could she? There was a large part of Sunset that wanted to do just that, to tell some pony, any pony, about everything that had happened to her. But that wouldn't be fair. She needed to talk with Celestia first. The mirror's purpose had been a secret even from herself, the princess's personal student. If she was going to prove that she could be better, that she would be better, she'd need to start by respecting Celestia's wishes. I'm sorry, but I can't. I just really need to speak with her. The young mayor sighed. Here's the thing. The princess isn't exactly feeling well today. I don't know exactly what's wrong, but she even canceled my afternoon lessons. Sunset felt like she had been ripped through the portal again. Breathing was becoming ragged and her ears started filling with a buzzing sound. Your lessons? The mayor brightened up with the topic. Oh, yes. I'm guessing you're not from around here? I'm Twilight Sparkle, the princess's personal student. Sunset took a step back. You're her... Are you okay? You seem a little out of sorts. Replaced. Sunset had been replaced. While she had been struggling, spending every waking moment longing to return to Celestia's side, she had been replaced. Just like that. Never mind. Sunset's tone came out oddly level, although the rest of her world crumbled around her. It shouldn't be so surprising. Why would Celestia wait for her, a failed pupil? She had said it herself. Sunset Shimmer, I am removing you from the position of my pupil. Are you sure you're... Yes. Sunset stared into her replacement's eyes. I'm fine. Well, okay then. I hope the rest of your stay in Candlelight Castle works out better for you. Sunset said nothing as she walked away. There was nothing to say. She stood in the hallway for far too long. She didn't know what else to do. You didn't really think it would be so simple, did you? Sunset wheeled around. She had heard Celestia's voice, but there was no one there. That I would ever want you back? Sunset spun all the way around, looking everywhere in the hall, but she saw no sign of the princess, or of any pony else. But don't worry. Twilight's a much better student than you ever were. Twilight would never disobey me. I don't need you anymore. Equestria doesn't need you. You were going home. Have a power, nothing to deserve. I'm better off without you. Just better off without you. This would allow you to exist in this better than the other school.